Welcome to the BizBen podcast, the show that explores all topics relating to selling and buying small to mid-sized California businesses. And now let's join nationally known consultant and author, the host of this podcast, Peter Siegel.
Today's segment is on becoming a business broker, what it takes on being successful. Hi, Tim. How are you?
Fine, thanks. Good to talk to you today, Peter.
Good to talk to you, too. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Tim, and about what you do and how you help buyers and sellers.
Sure. Well, I'm a business broker. I help sellers prepare and present their business for sale to prospective buyers. I work with buyers and helping them discern which is the best business for their particular circumstances. I could get the two of them together. We go over the merits of a business, look at the financing, look at the contract, and basically take the deal from the beginning, from the initial interest of the seller all the way through to the closing and the transfer of the ownership to the buyer. What I bring to that is a background in owning my own businesses, having practiced law for many years in New Jersey, having a background in business management. So a familiarity with what a lot of business sellers have experienced and with what a lot of business buyers are looking for.
Fantastic. So, Tim, let's get right into it. Usually, who enters this industry, and usually what type of work background do they have?
Well, there's probably not a usual. There's such a wide variety of people who are business brokers. But generally speaking, I would say it's someone who has owned their own business or has been in business management, who understands not just the finances, but the psychology of business ownership. That way they can relate to potential sellers and buyers. They should have a background, at least an understanding of basic financial concepts. They should be good communicators and should be basically people. They need to be able to relate to people of all kinds, all ages, all genders, all ethnic backgrounds. They really have to be able to deal with a wide variety of people because business buyers and sellers come from every aspect of the population you can imagine. So I would say that the background, the educational background, generally speaking, they're going to have at least a college degree. Sometimes they're going to have an advanced degree. There's a number of MBAs in business brokering, although that's not at all essential. I'd say the most important factor and the most likely person to go into business brokering is the person who's owned a business before or been in business management in the past.
Yeah, I agree, Tim. I know when I went into business brokerage a while ago, I owned several of my own businesses and sold one of my own businesses myself, and also had a business broker sell it who I felt didn't do a great job. And I thought, I can do this. And who better knows how to sell a business or the whole process than somebody who is in small business management and maybe own their own business. So I find in BizBen that a lot of the business brokers on BizBen usually have had their own business or management background. And you're right, typically an MBA or a business background that typically go into it, that want to call their own hours, that want to help people and have a diversity of tasks to make their work life interesting. So I agree you. So how long does it take typically to be successful in business brokerage? What do you find in?
That depends on how you define success, right? So if it's doing something that you enjoy, you probably become successful very quickly. If it's making a lot of money at it, it takes time and hard work. How long? Well, let me throw it back to you, Peter. How long did it take you to become successful in business brokering?
It's interesting, Tim, because I think it took me about 8 months to a year to be quote-unquote successful. I had goals and aspirations of what I wanted to do as a business broker, on how much money I wanted to make, but also too where I fell into a groove where I could get listings, put them in the pipeline, and then also sell them. So it took me about a year to really groove. And that's typically what I find with most other business brokers. If they haven't been successful, usually within a year, they usually, I find, drop out. So,
yeah, I think that if you look at the typical cycle of a business sale, and people always ask me what is the typical time it takes for a business to sell. I tell them there is no typical. But, if you're looking at approximately 6 to 8 months, then the business broker is going to have to realize that when they start in business brokering, the first thing they're going to need to do is obtain listings, get them promoted, and then begin to have sales closings where they're making their commissions. So realistically, they're going to be looking at time to get the listing, get it packaged, and get it on the market, and then get to a closing. They're looking at least 8 months before that first commission check's going to come in, maybe more than that. And so after a year, they should be getting, they should start having hopefully a steady flow of income. And I think a lot depends on how successful they're going to be. It's going to depend on how prepared with and I think that the path that one takes to becoming a broker has a lot to do with whether or not they're going to be successful, how soon they're going to be successful. They have a rapport with attorneys, accountants, and their connections, then they can get it right away. And they have to basically start building that network from scratch. It could take considerably longer. So the best, I think, the fastest success to interest into business brokerage, knowing a good number of business owners, because I would say that at least 10% of business owners at any one time I'll say actively considering the prospect of selling their business. They may not be doing anything about it, but they're thinking about it. So if a business broker starts out with a lot of business connections, then let's his world know that he's now their go-to person to prepare the business for sale, to value it, and to put it to market. I think they can be successful definitely within that first year.
I think so too. Yeah, usually the 1 year mark is the demarcation point for most brokers and agents, and let's jump off there. So we've decided that 1 year is probably the norm. By the time you get your listing, by the time you market it, by the escrow typically takes anywhere from 30 to 60 days, depending on the type of businesses and the nuances of that particular listing. Let's talk a little bit about commission rates. Now, commission rates, from my perspective that I've seen from talking to agents and brokers, really can range anywhere from 8 to 12% on business sales, really depending. You have some residential real estate agents who are more familiar with the 6% commission, so they may charge 6 to 8%, but they don't sell businesses all the time. But if you want a professional business broker to sell your business, I'm seeing 10 to 12. What are you seeing out in the marketplace, Tim?
Seeing it even closer to 12, and it depends on the size of the sale. When you under $1 million, it's typically going at 12%, but there's a minimum commission as well, which is typically $15,000. So that the business that would, the $150,000 business would be 12% on that. But as I said, if it sells for $100,000, it's going to be a $15,000 minimum, which basically is 15% commission. As the price of the business goes up, or the actual sale goes up, we've seen increasingly sort of a graduated scale. It might be 12% under, let's say it's a $2 million business, it might be 12% under $1 million, 10% in the second million. Or because of the size of it might be 10% on the first million, and then 9% on the second million. And the other thing is they're totally negotiable. The point you made about the professional business broker is important, because people do encounter real estate agents who are not specializing in business brokering, who will take a listing and they haven't the slightest idea how to market a business. And the first thing you know, they've put this business up on multiple listings, and everyone in the world knows where it's located, knows it's for sale, and the confidentiality is totally destroyed. To be a business broker in California, you have to be licensed as a real estate broker, real estate licensee. So I'm a licensed real estate broker. I can sell residential property, and I can manage properties, and I can negotiate leases. I don't. I specialize in business brokering. And when I have someone who has a real estate deal that's not associated with the business, I say, great, I'd be happy to help you. Let me refer you to someone who's expert at that. And frankly, it's the same thing that people who are real estate professionals should do when they have a potential seller or buyer who's interested in the business. They should say, great, I'd be happy to help you. Let me refer you to an expert at that and refer them to a business broker. But the commissions, and people wonder, well, why is it so much more of a commission for business brokering than it is for real estate? If you're selling a building, you put a big sign up in the building saying building for sale, and you've got probably 10 others like it in the square mile area, so it's easy to compare and contrast them. You don't have to be confidential about the building being sold, and there's comparables. There's a lot big market out there. When you're selling a business, it's absolutely confidential. So the business broker has this task of selling something that they really can't tell the world is available until they get interest from the market, because it has to be remain confidential. And then also, when you're selling a building, it's bricks and mortar. You can go out, you can look at it, you can see it, you can touch it, you can feel it. When you're selling a business, so much of it is goodwill, the potential of that business to make a profit that has to be properly explained and properly presented so that the buyer realizes the value that they're going to be getting, and whoever's financing it realizes the value so that they'll provide the financing. And there's a lot more work involved, which is why there's a higher commission.
Tim, talk about minimum commissions, if you will, because a lot of sellers don't realize that there's minimum commissions too. They automatically think it's just 10 to 12%. So for a lot of these smaller deals, there's typically a minimum commission for work performed. Talk about that.
Yeah, the minimum commission, when I started out doing business brokering, I thought, minimum commissions wasn't fair. And I did my first deal at a 12% commission, and it was a $60-something thousand sale. Well, I was cutting my teeth on it. When I saw all the work that was involved and all the costs involved in advertising and in responding to the phone calls and showing the business to about 10 different people, the time it took to go out there, I realized that $7,000 or $7,200 commission barely covered my expenses. And that's when I said, the minimum commission makes sense. There's certain standard costs that are going to be incurred to sell a business. They're going to be the time that's involved in properly packaging it, presenting it, examining the financials, recasting the financials, preparing the advertising, all the costs of advertising on BizBen and the other platforms that they get advertised on. By the way, I would say BizBen's the best. But there's costs involved with that. And those costs are significant, and the broker needs to cover those. Selling the $1 million business is not 10 times the work of selling the $100,000 business. But because selling a $100,000 business is going to take a lot of time, and that's why generally most business brokers are charging a minimum commission, and in California that seems to be around $15,000. I've heard colleagues talking about even going to $18,000 as a minimum commission. So if the business sells for $100,000, $15,000 is the commission to the broker, not 12% or 10%. And if it sells for $70,000, $15,000 is the minimum commission. And just as an aside, sometimes people are selling a business because they need to get out of a lease, and they're basically selling the business for next to nothing. And I've seen businesses sell for $20,000 and $25,000, and the broker gets $15,000 because what he's done is gotten the seller out of an obligation for 4 more years on a lease that they can't afford. So it's still worth their while. to sell that business and have a broker handle it so that they have benefits even though they're paying a lion's share of the price to the broker.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let's move on from the commission rates to what it takes to be successful as a business broker. This is my favorite topic because I've seen, at least in the last 5 years, our industry has really changed, with the internet and several other advances in other areas, that business brokerage to be successful really is a lot different. And I see a lot of business brokers who complain that they aren't, quote unquote, making it, yet they're only doing it part-time. And to me, I feel it's very hard to be successful in doing this part-time and really doing your clients a service and doing a good job by doing this part-time. What's your take on this?
No, I agree with you. It's not part-time. I think one of the reasons for the business brokerage is so that they can have freedom of setting their own hours and setting their own agenda, which is great. But part of that is they still have to be available. And, I'll use me as an example. When I start into a relationship with a buyer or a seller, I say, here's my cell phone. Call me. You can get me anytime you want. And if you really, really need to call me at 3 o'clock in the morning, make sure it's really urgent. You can call me at 3 o'clock in the morning, but that's okay. And it says, if you can't reach me by phone, text me right away and we'll get back to you. And an assistant has a backup so that if I can't get back to someone, my assistant will get back to them. I think you have to be available in different modes. And that's a very important part of being successful. You need to use technology. That means having a great database, having the ability to communicate well with buyers and sellers, being able to track the buyers who are interested, being able to, and the other part of being successful is necessarily just getting the contract. It's following through from the time that goes into contract to the time it closes. A broker has to do that, and hopefully works with a really good escrow agent doing it. As an example, just recently I had a closing. It was for about a $400,000 business, and it was people who had a great business. They were running the business really well, but they did something their own way, and they got buyers who was before. Between the time and the time that we closed, I closed the email. Over 300 emails that I had to monitor and go through all the tiny little details of that business transaction. Now, do they all get that involved? No, but they can, and brokers got to pay attention to that detail. So this persistence is important, making sure that you can constantly being in the place where you're going to find sellers who are interested in selling their businesses, listening, being able to talk with sellers about what their important goals are for selling their business, what their dream is to do afterwards, with buyers looking very carefully at what their personality is, what kind of business they're looking for. So you've got to be listening, you've got to read people, have to communicate clearly and effectively. And the old sales formula secret, which is follow up, follow up, follow up, just being constantly in contact with people. So there's a wide variety of things that I find are important to be successful.
Yeah, when I talk to business buyers, Tim, I find that the number one complaint about business brokers, and there's about 3 or 4 of them, but the number one is that they don't get back to business buyers. Now, it cuts both ways, typically, in communication, but that's the number one complaint I get with business brokers, that buyers contact them or send them an NDA, and brokers are notorious for not getting back to them. And I think a large part of this is that business brokers tend to take on too many listings. Instead of quality, they tend to shoot for quantity and they take on too many listings, hoping that they'll sell and not really doing the right things, quote unquote, and that's a whole nother show about what they should be doing for their seller client. So, you know, as kind of a caveat to sellers who may be listening to this show, when you select a business broker, look at the number of listings that that particular broker has. And if it's more than, 10 maybe, you should probably start questioning if that broker really can handle more than 10 listings. I mean, some brokers will argue with me and say, 5, if they do a really great job, is the most that they can handle. So I agree. We're digressing a little bit. We're talking about a part-time career. So I think the point of this is that brokers and agents who do this part-time, it would be very, very difficult, but I do see a lot of guys who are retired. I see a lot of brokers in the industry who still own their own business but do brokerage on a very part-time, especially if they specialize in, let's say, smog shops or gas stations or something. In fact, I'll call some brokers up and then I'll hear the cash register ringing in the background, and they're trying to conduct themselves as a business broker. But yeah, to be truly successful, I think you need to have the right marketing in place. You need to have your systems in place, like you talked about, databasing buyers and sellers and being very professional about that, and the follow-through. Speaking of which, so let's say someone is full-time, what kind of operating costs does a business broker typically incur?
Well, that can be all over the block, and again, it's going to depend on to some extent, what kind of a support staff they have. So let me just segue back to a second for the number of listings. When I first started in business brokerage, I was advised to get every listing you possibly could, because the name of the game is a listing. Doesn't matter how good it is, just get every listing you possibly can. That was bad advice.
Very bad advice. Brokers, are you listening? That's very bad advice.
Very, very, very bad advice. You need to be discerning. I turn away sellers because we'll sit down and go up and say, your business is not ready to sell. Or this business is, you're going to have a problem with it this way, this way, this way. And sometimes I tell them, sometimes it's better for, especially the very small businesses, sometimes it's better for them to just sell it themselves. Because I know that as a business broker, I'm not, in that particular circumstance, I'm not going to bring anything of value to them, or not going to bring much of value to them. And I don't want to be in a position of basically taking a whole bunch of listings and see which one's going to stick to the wall when I throw at the wall. I don't think that's professional at all. So I've become discerning, and I take businesses to market that I feel that I can add something to that marketing effort and do a good service to the seller. And I think the number of listings that a broker takes is related to how much time they're putting into it, kind of support staff and support systems that they have. Support staff of some kind, technology that's going to keep them on top of referrals, yeah. The number of listings is important. You want to also look at what kind of listings they have. But the important thing is to realize that they're not doing, you don't want business brokers who are doing what a lot of venture capitalists do. They throw money at 10 different companies. One successful, probably successful. They're really happy. They don't care what happens to their mind. There's too many business brokers who approach business brokering that way.
Yeah, I find, Tim, that typically when I work with business brokers, and I work with a lot of business brokers in getting them financing, because the sister company of BizBen, BizBuy Financing, actually gets financing for buyers and brokers and agents. And what I find, and I'm astonished by this, is brokers who take a listing without even looking at financials or tax returns. They take it on word from the seller of what the business is making and go from there. And usually those deals are going to fall out in escrow and during due diligence. But you're right, to your point of taking any and every listing, why would you do that and waste your time? The turnover rate in this industry is 90%. it's extraordinarily high after the first year. And I've always tell new brokers and agents, do not waste your time. Get those tax returns and do an analysis of the tax returns, and even go one step further and get them pre-qualified for financing and see if they even qualify for financing. Because if not, you're going to waste a lot of time and you're going to lose a lot of deals. So the operating cost for business brokers is what I find is typically rent, but a lot of business brokers now work out of their home offices. They really don't need an office. They can work out of an executive suite. But most of their costs seem to go for marketing and advertising and operations. Is that what you find?
Yeah, and I would say that given advertising, telephone, car expense, professional insurance, business liability insurance, all of those operating costs, I think that someone should budget at least, they should budget. They don't necessarily have to spend this because they can be a little prudent in what they spend. But starting out, I think they should budget at least $5,000 a month. And that's not necessarily having an office. I think that having an executive suite address makes a lot of sense. And I'll give you my case in point. I handle businesses in different parts of California, depending upon what kind of business it is, but mostly I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I have a physical office in Palo Alto, and I spent about 12 to 14 hours a month in the office. And I figured, this is ridiculous. I'm on the road meeting business sellers in different areas, meeting with business buyers, and my computer, because everything I do is digital. We have a great database, a website, and everything we do. And I have a support staff at different locations, and everything's virtual. In this day and age, there's not necessarily a real need for the business broker to have a physical office. Now, different people run their business different ways. And when I need to meet with clients, I have a conference room I can use, or I meet them in various very good locations all over the Bay Area or in other parts of California. So I don't have that office expense. I do spend that money in marketing. I spend money on recruiting sellers. I spend money on web presence, on advertising. My own website. I spend it on attending networking sessions, belonging to a group like BNI or chamber groups, doing an exhibit at a business expo. All of these things are marketing costs. And the other important thing is that, as Eisenhower always said, that he knew 50% of all campaign spending was an absolute waste, of campaign advertising is an absolute waste. Problem is, no one knew which 50%. Well, you can spend a lot of money on marketing, and some of it's going to be very, very successful, and some of it isn't. And you also will have some that's going to give you results for 2 or 3 weeks, and other things that you don't even see the results of until 2 years later. I'll have people come to me to sell their business who I talked to 2.5 years ago. And they said, now I'm ready. I said, fine, that's great. But the cost there, I think, probably if someone was going to go into it, they'd have to really anticipate at least $5,000 a month. What do you think, Peter? What number?
I agree, Tim. I think 5,000 is probably a good benchmark, with a good portion of that going towards getting listings and then marketing those listings. I mean, that's primarily what it is. Business brokerage is very analogous to being a residential real estate agent. A lot of residential real estates work out of their home office. That's fine. But you've got to go out and procure those listings, and you've got to be successful in closing those deals. So I would say, I would say 5,000 is probably a good benchmark, depending on the business model. Now, some people have a manager and several agents and things like that, but that's a whole different structure. If we're talking about working for somebody, and that's a pet peeve of mine typically, is when business brokers work for a main broker and they let that broker handle all of their marketing costs and they aren't proactive in their success. So we'll talk about that. But let's move to another.
They don't have skin in the game. They don't have the fire in their belly because someone else is covering it for them.
Right, and that's the 90% that typically falls out and doesn't do a good job, or they complain because they're not making enough money. There is a success formula in this industry, and if you do it right, you'll be okay. But like you said, you have to have some of the personal attributes as well as the motivation and other factors to be successful, just like in any other industry. But let's talk about your daily activities. What does a business broker typically do daily?
That's a big question. I don't know that this is a typical day, but on a daily basis, we obviously have to list our communication, phone messages, email messages, and response to potential buyers and potential sellers on a regular basis. So both times a day, I basically get into my email, one of my see what goes on their agenda, set the priorities, and schedule the phone call. I found that one of the things that works great for me is when I have people who need me to call, want to talk with me, or I want to talk with them, rather than trying to randomly get them, I set appointments. I return, I have an appointment saying, let's talk tomorrow morning at 9:15, and we have an appointment set. And that way I find that that person's available when I call, and I'm available for them, and they know that time is dedicated to them. So it's basically a lot of it's communicating back and forth. In the evening, when this inquiry sort of died down a bit, is when I'll do a lot of the work on advertising and packaging of a deal, preparing the recast financials, doing the advertising, preparing the proposal, following up on a lot of email. The typical day can include a 15-minute drive or an hour and a half drive to visit with the seller and go over their business with them and review what their goals and aspirations are and what their finances are and how it's to be listed. And then an hour later, I might be visiting with a buyer and finding out what they're looking for, and then taking the buyer to see a seller and seeing the business. And the next day, it might be just staying in the office and not going anywhere. So there are typical days. I think that there's a lot of variety in it. But the thing that defines every day is being on top of all of the communications that come in, the inquiries to advertising, the inquiries for a listing, the people who will call and say, I just would like to learn about this whole process, and responding to them. I'm constantly talking with people who I have no idea they're ever going to be a seller or a buyer, but, karma is what it is, and I like to at least help people out with, give them some time to share with them the nuances of this whole process of buying and selling a business. But I would say the underlying factor is the constant attention to communication. As I said, whether it's with the buyer, the seller, or when you're involved in the transactions, keeping in touch with the escrow agent. When I have deals in process, I'm in touch with the escrow agent about each deal at least 3 times a week. If that process might take 2 or 3 weeks, it might take 2 months. But I'm constantly in touch with that escrow agent, making sure that the process between contract and closing is going smoothly. So it's communicating with the escrow agent, communicating with the bankers, getting the financing done. A typical day, I might be talking with the landlord about how they're going to extend the lease for the required 10-year minimum for an SBA loan, getting them comfortable with a new buyer of a business. So it's the typical day. I would say the most consistent thing is constant interaction with people. And if someone is not comfortable with interacting with people of all kinds on a regular basis, consistently, they better not become a business broker.
I agree with you, Tim. I really do. And that's what I find astonishing with some business brokers and agents is that they don't database their information. And nowadays, with all the online programs like Salesforce and others, that they don't, how do they know what they've talked about to people? I'm always amazed. They say, well, I have folders. I mean, folders is so 1980s. Get with the program here and get a database. So when someone calls you, you know who the heck they are, the history of the conversation or the deal, where the deal is at. But do that. I want to move on a little bit. It sounds like your day's really busy. I know when I was a business broker, my days were 12 and 14-hour days between, like you said, day and evening work. So it can get kind of crazy if you want to be successful. Let's talk about how business brokers find listings. Now, I know when I was a business broker, and I'm sure it's changed, and I was a specialty business broker. I specialized in businesses that had an adjusted net income of over $100,000. That it had to have an adjusted net of over $100,000, and it had to be provable. That's why I got tax returns and financials, and it had to be either management, distribution, specialty, retail, or service. That's what I did. A lot of my clients were coming out of corporate America who were dissatisfied, who wanted to basically step into a business and be professional. Now, I got a lot of my clients, the types of my clients, with oversized postcards. I don't know why, but they worked because what I found was the owners saw them, they looked at them, and then I also had biweekly live workshops for sellers who actually attended, and I would have anywhere from 8 to 10 sellers in all of my workshops, and I usually held them at the Chamber of Commerce. But what I noticed was, and I want to go back to with what you said, is because this marketing does pay off, because I would have people call me 2 years later and say, I got a postcard from you and it was in a folder and now I want to sell. But the bottom line on those postcards, at least for me, was I would make sure that they would go out to the same people and hit them at least every 2 to 3 months. Not just once, but they would get a postcard from me, identified the audience of exactly who I wanted as a client, and made sure they got those postcards every 2 to 3 months. And then I also reached out to other professionals like attorneys and escrow companies and CPAs for referrals and made sure that they got my newsletter every month religiously. Again, all going back to a database. All these people were databased, either buyers, sellers, resources, whatever. They were databased. That's how I got all of mine, and I would typically have 10 listings at any one time, but they were all very good listings, and I had a 90% close rate because of that system. How do you find listings, Tim?
Well, all of the above, and then some. Starting out, what a lot of business brokers will do is they'll do something called a drop letter, which seems to be effective in areas for mostly retail-type businesses, where they will target an area and have 200 or 300 letters and envelopes marked for the owner confidential, and they'll either drop it to the mail. They'll go, early in the morning or late at night. They'll go through business districts and drop them off in the mailboxes, or use painter's tape and tape it to the door. And sometimes they'll get a response on 300 of those drop letters. They'll get a response of 1. Sometimes they get a response of 30 or 40. It's amazing, and there's no way of predicting it. How good those responses are, basically, if they get one listing out of it, it's probably paid for their effort without any problem. I don't know how professional that appears, frankly. Once someone's established, they tend not to do that anymore. There's canvassing. If they're going for the retail business, it's just, and they've got 2 or 3 hours free in a day, or they schedule it. They canvass through a commercial district and just go from business to business, asking to speak to the owner. They get listings that way. They'll join the Chamber of Commerce and put on seminars, which is an excellent way of doing it. If you can get business owners to get into a room and admit to their colleagues that they might be interested in selling it, one big drawback I assume with that is that sellers are afraid to go someplace about smart business because everyone else knows they're interested in talking business. So what I do is I put them, I call them planning your exit strategy for long-term success. That way they're not saying, I'm selling that business next month. They say, eventually I'm going to sell my business. Everyone does. There's a lot of online exposure. I got it. Not based in San Francisco. I have getting a business listed in London, England, because it's a manufacturing company and they sell it to someone in the United States and relocate it to the United States, they found me on the internet. I found someone who was interested in selling a manufacturing business in Oregon, and he found my white paper on selling a small manufacturing company, which draws on my experiences owning and selling my own manufacturing companies. He found this article that I posted up online, probably 2.5 years ago. And he found that and said, I just saw your article. It's everything I need to know. Because of that, I'd really like you to list my business. So I'll cooperate with an Oregon broker, and I'll bring that market. Because it's a big enough business that makes sense. Especially it's the manufacturing area. So it's the networking. I use a service that will actually make calls to the industries that I've targeted, get the CEO or the owner, and determine that they definitely would like to talk to someone about selling their business, and they set up an appointment for me. I've used meetings. When I have a business for sale in a specific niche area, I will find other businesses in that area, and I'll write to them. I might send out 100 or 500, whatever it might be, letters and phone calls to people in the same industry and say, one of the best ways of selling your business is through the best way of expanding your business is through acquisition. We have a business in your industry for sale. And oh, by the way, have you thought about the value of your business and whether or not you might be interested in selling yours? And I guess it's that way because people say, oh, he's already selling this kind of business. He must know something about selling mine. And they'll call up and say, I'm not interested in buying that business, but yeah, I am interested in seeing if you can list my business for me. Let's find out what it's worth. So
Tim, you're right. And I want to jump in here, Tim, sorry to interrupt, but I want to jump in and tell people how important that is. Usually business brokers only go one way with their listings. They do for sale listings, but they have this whole other side of their database that's so asset rich, and that's buyers. And you know which buyers are serious about buying a business. These are guys that have left their work. They're spending their savings to live. They need to buy something because they have expenses. They can't start up a business. They have to buy a business. And there's so many brokers out there. On BizBen, you can post a business wanted to buy posting, and you can go the other way. Exactly. And it's really interesting because the brokers who post business wanted to buy postings, 30% of the people on BizBen, the visitors, are business sellers, and they're looking for buyers. So I never understand it why brokers, that's another great marketing venue for getting listings, because the seller will call them and say, I see you have a buyer who's interested. And many times it's just not a great fit, but that's a great lead for a broker agent. That particular buyer didn't fit. So that's another great way of getting listings. I know you mentioned telemarketing. Telemarketing, I've heard, works pretty well. It really depends. But there's a lot of factors on getting listings, and we'll probably have a show actually just on that. But let's talk about compensation, annual compensation. I know a lot of brokers ask me, well, what can I expect to make in this industry? And if you work part-time, you're probably going to make maybe $25,000 to $30,000, somewhere in there. But if you work full-time and do a lot of the factors that we talked about today, and you're online marketing, because that's where sellers, buyers, and everybody meets to do deals now, is online. You have to have that exposure in social media, on your website, and writing articles and contributing online, because that's where sellers actually roam now to look for information. So if you do all of that, I tell new brokers and agents, after a year, you should expect to make anywhere from $100,000 to $300,000 realistically if you do it right in this industry. But too many brokers and agents, I find, don't follow the success formula, and they do a lot of the things from the past that just don't work, and they don't work hard enough, and they don't make the money. But someone who is motivated, who does the right things, can make anywhere from $100,000 to $300,000. That's what I found. What's your take?
I agree with you. I think that is a very reasonable expectation. And one of the factors is learning how to discern which listings to take and which ones to avoid. It's discerning the it's the listing that's not taken that can often be the key to success, because I've seen brokers, and I've done it myself, wasting an enormous amount of time on a business that's just not sellable. And that's time that could have been spent on something else that actually might close and might generate a commission. Again, getting your criteria when you were brokering that you wouldn't take anything with sales under $100,000. Well, that's a good area as well. So basically, I've seen people, I know them personally, who've sold 50 businesses in a year and have made like minimum commissions on every one of them and done very well. Extraordinarily rare. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they have time to sleep. That's not the way to be successful. The way to be successful and to make those kinds of good six-digit net incomes is to be discerning about the listing that's taken, to be consistent about the follow-up with them. As you said, pre-qualify them. Make sure that they're going to be qualified for financing. And having that consistent marketing. The exposure on the internet. People ask me sometimes when they're sellers, they say, "What papers do you advertise in?" I say, "I don't." That's so naive. Nobody advertises in the newspaper. In fact, however, we can get exposure in many different ways for people. And one of the best ways, obviously, is online. And it's not just the listings that someone put on BizBen. It's not just the listings they put on BizBen. It's to what extent is that broker active with discussions and blogs and comments, and are they listing? Are they doing businesses wanted ads like you mentioned? Because when I have buyers come to me, I'll tell them, look, what we'll do for you is we'll help you figure out the parameters that you're looking for, kind of business, location, you want business to business, business to consumer, lifestyle you want, and then they'll say, now you start looking. I said, I could look for you, but me looking for you isn't going to expose you to everything that's available. When we narrow it down to specific areas, something that the business wanted ad up on BizBen, and get inquiries from sellers. They're saying, well, I have a business for sale, and I'd like to see if your buyer is appropriate. And I'll say, well, there's a chance that my buyer might be the buyer for you, but if not, I can find you other buyers as well. And do all of those things. And I think the most important thing to being successful, to having financial success, is not in what you do, it's in what you don't do. Don't waste the time. Only 80%.
Don't waste your time.
Right.
Absolutely, because the statistic in California small and mid-sized businesses is 75% of those businesses don't sell. Now, I'm not saying they don't sell on BizBen, but in general, in the California marketplace, 75% of all small businesses and mid-sized businesses never sell. And it's a lot about what we just talked about, is they don't do the preparation work. And I know we're going to be having a Wednesday night webinar based on this, but it's really important that before you go to market, one of the topics for this particular segment is what attributes makes a broker successful. We talk about them, but that initial work up front is so important. And looking at the financials and tax returns, because realistically, why does a buyer buy a business? They want some kind of return. They want to make sure that they can pay their mortgage and their living expenses. They want to make sure, or you want to make sure that that business is making money, because if it's not, it's probably not going to sell. And most owners typically want too much money for that business. They're usually overpriced. And then they get, knocked around on the internet, and they find out real fast that it's not worth it, and then they have to double back. Let's talk a little bit about specialization.
Okay.
And should brokers specialize in?
One thing you mentioned about the attributes of a broker, because I think this is a real important one, and it has to do with things like, what is the business value at? And I tell that if they set the price way too high, then it's incredible, not believable, and will anything. And then if they set the price way too low, people wonder what's wrong with the business. It has to be a credible price, and the broker's got to be brutally honest with the seller and say, look, I know you want $2.2 million. And really, I can do that, but $2 million, when it's going to be a waste of time, you're going to be frustrated with it. And it's just, the brokers have to be honest and say, we know what this is worth, as opposed to saying, I'll take a listing no matter what it is. And I think charity brokers that are not as open and candid and transparent with buyers and sellers as they should be. So that's
I agree.
Really important attribute is behavior.
Yeah, I would tell sellers, I would say, you know what, I look at things from a buyer's perspective. Doesn't that make sense? It's got to be a win-win situation for both parties for a transaction to be successful. And you've got to look from a buyer's perspective. And I would tell, and the only reason why I know this is because I've sold my own business, and it sat on the market for a year and a half. I thought, what's wrong? And then a very wise business broker said, look, and he gave me this advice, actually. He said, let's look at it from a buyer's perspective. Let's look at it from a return on investment perspective. If you were a buyer, would you buy your business? And I looked at the numbers, and I said, heck no. I wouldn't buy this business. There's no way. It doesn't make financial sense. And that's what most sellers don't look at. It doesn't make sense for the buyer, because if it doesn't make sense for a buyer, no one's going to buy the business. Buyers are getting increasingly more knowledgeable about buying businesses these days. Back in the good old days when financing was plentiful, not so much, because there was such a high demand and people kind of leapt and they just kind of took a chance. Not these days. Buyers want to make sure that deal makes sense financially for them. So right. You're absolutely right. Now, going back to specialization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that it's usually best for a broker to deal with the kinds of businesses in which they have some kind of background or expertise. That doesn't mean that they can't be a manufacturing expert who once in a while takes a restaurant, depending on what that restaurant might be and what the parameters are. But I think the specialization is very worthwhile. It gives confidence to the seller that they know what they're doing with that industry, and it also helps them in their prospecting. It helps them target better. It's marketing with a rifle rather than a shotgun. It just is far more accurate, finding buyers and finding potential sellers. But generally speaking, an area in which either that the broker has expertise, or an area in which they've happened to have sold a number of businesses and they've become expert in it. I mean, we know that there are people who do nothing but sell clean laundries. Why? Because they know them inside and out, and that's what they do. Some brokers don't like that because they get bored with it, right? And they like to have a variety of different types of businesses that they deal with. So specialization is important, but I think it depends on the personality and the background of the broker.
Yeah. Now, I felt when I was a broker, it was a hybrid situation, right? I didn't specialize, but I kind of did, because it was manufacturing, distribution, service, and specialty retail, but it had to have an adjusted net income of over $100,000. If it didn't, I didn't take it. So is that specialization? I would say yes, it really is. And on BizBen, I see the people that do specialize typically do better financially. In fact, I had a broker call me 2 weeks ago who said, look, I have the option of being a generalist, or because of my background, I can be an auto specialist and do smog shops, gas stations, auto repair, et cetera, in a smaller geographic segment. And I said, I would do that any day of the week. And as long as, like you said, you don't get bored, you still find that interesting within a year to 5 years. Right. And he's done that, and he's been really, really successful and absolutely loves it. And it's such a small industry that people have gotten to know him as the expert, and he doesn't have to reinvent the wheel every time he takes a listing. So my feeling is if you can specialize, do it. Because then when you write or you comment on BizBen, you can really speak from knowledge, and you get to be known as the person to go to. In fact, I have a lot of brokers that will actually pass listings or refer listings to specialty people because they just don't have the expertise to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I agree with that completely. That, and the other thing, that since this is about brokerage, obviously that there are referral fees paid back and forth, and often it makes much more sense to refer something to another broker and say, hey, when you sell it, you can pay me a referral fee, but you're better at this, you should earn the commission, and then go for it. And I think that's often serving the interests of the potential seller much more than trying to be all things to all people.
Exactly. Tim, the last thing that I want to talk about on this blog is and podcast is I want to talk about training to become a business broker, what it takes, where do you get training from a business broker? Now, I know in the old days it was pretty standard that you would go to work for somebody else. The franchises were not really established, like the VR and the Sun Belt, the Transworld, and all of those. So if you went to a brokerage office, it was very much like residential real estate. You would go in as a trainee and you would train under somebody else. Buyers would come in and you would basically educate buyers. You would go to some training classes, but nothing like it is today. What do you feel is the best training, or where should you get the best training to become a successful business broker?
Really good question. Well, first of all, in California, the California Association of Business Brokers. Nationally, there's a National Association of Business Brokers, International Business Brokers Association, and they both have training programs. They can go from a day or two to a week. That's good training. It gives you the overview, the broad strokes. To be perfectly honest, people who've asked me about business brokering, they said, what's the best place to get trained? They said, get onto BizBen, look at the discussions, start from the very beginning, and read through every discussion on BizBen, and you're going to learn so much about business brokering and the whole process of selling a business, your head's going to blow up. Because you have such a wealth of information on there. Seriously, I think it's the best resource on the web of all the information there. So a lot of it can be self-education. There are programs available. Going to a franchise business broker, they often will have a 3-day, 5-day, 2-week training section that's available to new brokers. It's usually they're not state specific, so you're getting a lot of general information about being a business broker, but what applies in Oshkosh doesn't necessarily apply in LA, with markets and with forms and with state regulations and everything else. So that's another way of doing it. I think probably the worst way of doing it is by saying, I'm going to buy a business brokering franchise in order to get the training. Because if that's the reason they're buying the business brokering franchise, that becomes very, very, very expensive training. And I would say there's other reasons that someone might want to buy a business brokering franchise, but it shouldn't be it's available from CAB and from IBBA and online. But the best way to have a mentor. To learn what they need to know.
That's great advice.
That answers your question. That's my take on it.
That is great advice, Tim. I want to thank you for attending my daily vlog and podcast today, Tim. I think we've covered a lot of ground on how to become a successful business broker, and I know you've really traveled down the road in becoming a successful business broker. I've tried a lot of things, and I think you know kind of what it takes now to be a successful broker. So I'm really glad you could attend today's show, and look forward to having you on future shows. Thanks so much.
It was my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Thank you for joining today's featured show with your host, Peter Siegel, on the BizBen podcast. When buying or selling a California business, franchise, or business opportunity, make sure you receive professional advice on all legal and business matters pertaining to any transactions. The opinions and information expressed by today's guest are not necessarily endorsed by BizBen and Business Exchange Networking. Please join us again in the future to learn, share, and experience case studies, interviews, and focused information on the topic of selling and buying small to mid-sized California businesses.